Welcome to the Thriving Mayor Show, the weekly broadcast featuring former and current mayors who are thriving, sharing their story, insight, wisdom, and viewpoint. Join us and comment on social media as we meet another of the superheroes we elect to lead the rejuvenation of our towns and cities and who serve us all. Visit www.thrivingmayor.com to learn more. Here we go. Hello, everyone. It's Michael Hubicki, the host of the Thriving Mayor Show, and it's June 16th, 2021. And I'm super excited today and honored to have Chief Dave Mowat of the Alderville First Nations in Ontario. Hello, Chief Mowat. How are you today?
I'm well, Mike. Good to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Dave, for coming on the show at such short notice. It's really appreciated.
Not a problem.
Just so everyone knows, this show was pre-recorded, but we do welcome social media posts either during the live broadcast on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. or anytime thereafter. And I keep an eye out for posts and try to respond to those as best I can. I'll begin this episode by honoring the land and the Indigenous peoples who've lived here from the beginning. I'm grateful for the opportunity to live here and thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. In particular, I honor the ancestors of the land, the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. This territory is covered by the 1873 Crawford Purchase. I'd just like to read a little bit about Dave from his bio here. Dave Mowat has spent over 30 years working in various capacities at the First Nation level in Winnipeg, Waabaseemoong, Scugog Island, and Alderville. I'm sure I got that pronunciation wrong. As a researcher, writer, youth worker, economic development officer, consultation specialist, band counselor, and is elected chief of the Alderville First Nation since 2019, Dave has remained committed to the positive advancement of his community. His passion and focus remain researching and understanding the treaty, military, and settlement history of Southern Ontario or Upper Canada. This experience over decades has allowed him to defend the Mississauga Anishinaabe presence in Southern Ontario with confidence and commitment. Dave is also a longtime blues musician singer, having taken up the harmonica back in the early 1980s, shortly after relocating to North End, Winnipeg from Southern Ontario. He still plays professionally in Toronto and South Central Ontario. As a traditional wild rice harvester, he's a staunch defender of this Aboriginal right across Alderville's treaty areas. In the wake of the 2018 Williams Treaty Settlement Agreement, Chief Dave Mowat's main intent was and continues to be securing the settlement of the immediate and long-term viability of Alderville First Nation. He currently sits on the Queen's University Indigenous Elders Advisory Committee and the City of Kingston Sir John A. Macdonald History and Legacy Working Group. Dave, thank you so much for being a guest and our first chief on the Thriving Mayor Show.
Right on.
Yeah,
excellent.
Awesome for you to be here. I just want to convey my sincerest condolences and sympathies, Dave, to all of the families and the peoples who were impacted by our residential schools tragedy. And it's really came to light again recently with the discovery of that mass grave in Kamloops of the 215 children. And I just wanted to mention as well that I was really inspired by the walk that your group, that you led up in Alderville on May 30th, that was in recognition of this and other colonialism and colonialistic impacts on First Nations. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about this on the show today. And I also really appreciate you helping me craft the opening honoring of our lands and helping to educate me better on our First Nations, the legacies, and how I can participate and share the word, which I hope that I know that you're going to give us your super unique and valuable insights on today.
Thanks, Mike. So just as a correction, the Crawford Purchase is 1783. You said 1873, but so just for the record, it's 1783. That's how far back we're embedded in.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, that's a little bit of the dyslexia coming through there. Yeah,
yeah. When we found out about the Kamloops story and the discovery via the GPR technology that was used, I guess some people were not surprised. A lot of people were not surprised. I think some of the elders said, "See, we told you so." But still, to find out in that way, and for it to hit the national news the way that it did, it was very, it was shocking for a lot of people. I gotta say, it wasn't really shocking for me. I sort of expected that already. And of course, through the TRC and through, the insight of people that we talk with, that was sort of already a known fact. But with technology and the advance of technology, I think we're just starting on this new page here now.
yeah.
Sadly. So on May 28th, that's when the news came out. And then I listened to the 18-minute press conference with the chief, and she did not say it was a mass grave. So I think there's some discrepancy about that. But regardless, they're unmarked, unrecognized, graves, and whatever it ends up being, whether it's mass grave or just, babies in unmarked graves. I think it's horrific. And so because of that emotion and that initial sort of shock of all that, our community in Alderville was compelled to do something. And I'll give a shout out to Greg Smoke, a local, one of our members, and lives on the reserve. And he was moved to do something. And so him and I corresponded, and I made sure that the police could be there and the EMS could be there to make sure that we could do our walk safely up to Highway 45.
Right.
And so, just by really the moccasin telegraph, what we might call it here, and by word of mouth and social media, by 11:45, a large group, including the OPP and the EMS, had gathered at the Alderville Health Services building, and we began our walk. And there was a lot of support from people driving down the highway, and it was just it was quite a moving event that we did, and we walked down to our war monument in the heart of Alderville, and it was all impromptu. I being a pretty good public speaker, I took the helm and just discussed the issue in general, but also the fact that Alderville First Nation is the site of one of the early industrial schools,
Right,
in Upper Canada, or Canada West by that time. And so, I gave a bit of a brief history about the industrial school, and then we had a moment of silence, and it was, and the weather was beautiful, and I couldn't really be more proud of how our community came together in such a short time to do that. And I should also say, our flag went down on May 29th, and both flags, we fly two flags at the Alderville War Monument, the Canadian flag and the Alderville flag, and both flags are still down. And I've been in my driving around the area, I noticed there's flags that are still down.
Oh yeah.
And it's a strange feeling, because I almost feel like they should stay down. It's a strange sense about it.
Yeah.
Unlike other times, it's a strange sense that those flags, it almost feels like they should stay half-mast.
Yeah, well put. I've heard that some municipalities are going to keep their flags down for 215 days.
Yeah, well, I heard 215 hours, which is just shy of 9 days. And then at the same time, we had two members that passed, two members of Alderville that passed in that time. And so we always honor them by dropping the flags for 4 days.
Oh
And
yeah.
so what I was originally told 215 hours.
Okay.
And on top of that would be 8 more days for the flags for the members. So we're looking at 17 days minimum. So our flags could go up back up on Monday, this coming Monday.
Mhm.
But it's just a strange sense about it all. I've never seen this before, really. I haven't seen it before.
No.
And it's really resonating with people now. I was getting calls, like a lot of calls last week. Still getting calls this week. Some letters from concerned clergy, from concerned church people, from concerned from municipal leaders.
Yeah.
Just from people in general. I got a phone call from a fellow yesterday here at my home who just felt compelled to have to do something. And I said, well, I really don't know what to tell you to do. Pray.
Yeah.
Pray for those lost souls. I really, the fact that you're phoning me and telling me this is you're doing something right now. You're acknowledging what has occurred. So, I appreciate people's reaching out and asking, what can I do? But, my sort of reply was, well, you're doing something right now. It's hit you and it's resonating inside you. And, just pray for those lost souls.
Yeah. At the near the end of the YouTube video, there was an interview with one of the elders. I think he traveled from Quebec, and he had been in a residential school, and he was conveying the story about it, and it's just really moving. Really
Yeah,
tough.
he is actually he's from Quebec. He's married to an Alderville woman, so
Okay.
he's from Quebec. I'm not even sure what community he's from, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So as Chief Dave, what are there things that or messages that you can convey to the community as a whole, or is this something that is just so personal that it's like dealing with people one-on-one?
Well, as a historian, I have a bit of an ice cold view on the historical record.
Uh-huh.
I understand how emotion can enter into things, but it can cloud your historical sort of analytical abilities. And so I'm kind of ice cold when it comes to that information and that history, because in order to convey what I understand, I can't let myself be overrun by emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm always careful to explain to people how this history unfolded as I understood it and as I understand it, and how colonialism and the assimilationist agenda, beginning far beyond Confederation,
Mm-hmm.
how that already became a fact of our lives and our communities. I can only really speak from the Alderville perspective, but and then when you follow that historical timeline, and that's the way I have to think sometimes, is how the colonies developed, and in Upper Canada and in Canada West became Canada West in 1841. There was already an assimilationist agenda occurring. Alderville First Nation, the reserve was surveyed in 1835. Our people were moved out of the Bay of Quinte, moved to the reserve, the new reserve here, and it was, the Methodist mission. It was the Methodists that were involved in that, and the intent was to create farmers out of our people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see how the Bagot Commission of 1842-44, it studies our people at that time, and then out of that comes this industrial school plan. And the industrial school was was built here at Alderville First Nation in 1849. And so the idea was to, advance that assimilationist agenda and create farmers out of our people. And the division of labor occurred where the girls were taught to be domestic servants, quote unquote, and the boys tradesmen and farmers. And the intent originally in the minds of people like John Sunday, one of our old chiefs, was that so the white man wouldn't cheat our people, so that our people would be able to read and write and do arithmetic, and so
Right.
they wouldn't get beat by the white man. But really, the intent was to assimilate our people, and because of the time period in the 1850s, our people still had self-governing authorities.
Hmm.
It was pre-Confederation, and so that's an important thing to remember as to why the Alderville School failed. Actually, is that the government hadn't yet come and bopped our people on the top of the head with Section 9124 out of the BNA Act, and then the Indian Act, and then the rule of law was used to advance the residential school system that we know today through the TRC.
Right.
But before Confederation, the fact that our people still had self-governing authority is one reason why the school failed in Alderville.
The industrial school.
The industrial school, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's sometimes entered. It's entered the terminology is it's interchangeable sometimes, and it has to be carefully considered that the industrial school here wasn't a residential school per se, because it wasn't forced upon the people. It was voluntary.
Right.
And the First Nations that it participated, Alderville, Mud Lake, Scugog, Lake Simcoe, and over as far as St. Clair, those communities and leaders that agreed to bring their children here did so voluntarily.
Mm-hmm.
And they also provided 25% of their annuity money to help support the school. And so it was a voluntary process, whereas after 1883, it is not voluntary. It's enforced on the people,
Right.
imposed
Right.
on the people. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And was Alderville also subjected and forced to the residential school?
Well, after the fact, there were some people that did go to the. So what happened when the industrial school plan failed in 1861? The school just went on what's called the provincial plan or the colony plan, pre-Confederation, and it becomes what becomes known as a day school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kids from Alderville would go to the school and go home, of course. But as we progressed through time, I can tell you that firsthand knowledge. I talked to a woman about in the late '90s, a woman from Alderville, and she told me that she was her mother died in. She was born in 1932, the same year as my mother, and her mother died in 1937. And by 1938, she had been pulled out of her home at 6 years old and sent to Chapleau, to the residential school there.
And she was in Alderville.
She was an Alderville girl, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And her mother passed, and so I would think that the missionary of the day and the Indian agent at the time saw that as a broken home, and and she was taken away. And there were other people that might be in those circumstances where there was a broken home, mom and dad's,
Mm-hmm.
maybe their marriage broke down. And so that was easy pickings for the Indian agent and or the missionary. And those kids would be picked off, as they say, and sent away. And that the woman I'm talking about that called me, the reason she was calling me was to know if I could find a picture of her mother.
Wow.
As sad as that was. And I did find a picture of her mother. I found a picture of her mother when her mother was 6 years old. I found a picture of her mother from a 1911 Alderville school picture. And I sent the picture to her. And And so it was kind of ironic that that the woman I'm talking about was 6 years old when she was taken to Chapleau, and I found a picture of her mother when her mother was the same age. So I never talked to her ever again. I believe that she was in Vancouver when she talked to me, and um, I just hope that she found some peace by seeing a picture of her mother.
Yeah, yeah. It's awesome that you could help her out that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dave, tell us a little bit about. I mean, your history of knowledge is incredible, and you're a writer as well. Can you share with us a little bit about your process of writing and how why you got involved in that? And
You're right.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'm a fortunate young fella. I was a fortunate young fellow. Um, my great grandfather raced in the 1908 Olympic Marathon in London, England,
wow,
and his name was Fred Simpson, and he placed sixth for Canada. And he was on the in the same marathon and on the team with Tom Longboat from Six Nations, and uh, and so I grew up with that story here in Alderville. Uh, I grew up with the story of his running career, and and so for a 7 and 8 year old boy hearing those stories, it was fascinating for me.
yeah,
And I'm just one. I was the only one, I guess, of my age group that really became moved and influenced by that story. And so I started to become really interested in community history from a very young age because of that story.
right,
And I remember seeing pictures on my mom or my grandmother's wall of her dad, Fred Simpson, and just wondering who that man was and what was
yeah,
the story behind him. And then as time progresses, I started to delve into that sort of Olympic story and learned about Longboat and Louis T. Winnema. He was the other North American First Nation runner in that marathon.
right,
Um, it's actually on YouTube. Actually, it was the first Olympic Games that was photographed by commission and filmed. Uh, and so I actually can see my great grandfather run by the camera at the crack of the gun at 2:33 p.m. on the east lawn of Windsor Castle, July 24th, 1908. And
beautiful,
so for a young mind, that was just it was just mind blowing that I had a relative in my past that accomplished that. And
yeah,
so that is the reason why I became interested in local history. My mother grew up with them, and so I have firsthand oral tradition of his life here and his accomplishments. And so that's the reason he's the window through which I looked to the broader history of Alderville First Nation.
right,
And so since that time, as a young teenager, I've been involved in trying to understand the history of our community. And now, of course, over the last 30 years, being more involved in history and studying history in university, etc. Um, my so I guess my real intent has been to educate people, try to educate people on our histories, on our accomplishments, and um, on our treaty history and the involvement of our people in the early settlement of Ontario. The military history, of course, is
mm,
another important piece of my interest and knowledge. Our involvement in the War of 1812. In fact, the Mississauga Nation involvement in the 7 Years' War um, is quite a fascinating history. And history is not just dusty old books on a shelf. It's a sort of a living art. It's there's always new interpretations of history.
yeah, yeah,
There's always new um, people. There's new writers and new researchers that get into the historical record that maybe others didn't. So for me, it's a moving and living sort of an art, if you will, not necessarily a science, but it's a living and breathing art. And so for me, the anchor of all of that is Fred Simpson, the Ojibwe Thunderbolt, he was called.
wow, cool. And I love the way you phrase it as the living art. And it's really incredible. So when you're researching, do you have a preference for trying to talk to people in person, or like get stories from people that maybe have a story from a relative, or going into archives? And
my main I guess passion is to get into the primary records in the archives. And of course, a lot of archival material is easier to get online now. And then, of course, I draw on academics at Queen's, for instance. I work alongside a professor there, and she has access to primary documents that she shares with me. So that's my main emphasis is always getting into the primary documents. But you just can't beat either sitting down with somebody in the community and hearing from them what it was like, 70 years ago, 75 years ago. That is fascinating because you're never going to find that in the primary documents per se. You're going to hear things that pertain locally to the community on how people lived and how they shared and so they're two separate sort of viewpoints. There's two separate ways to go at it: the oral tradition and sitting with somebody, and of course then the primary documents. So
right.
I'm all over it as best I can be. I like to look at all angles and to read as much as I can from the primary sources, but also from those great writers that have done work before me as well. There's some really good stuff out there.
Yeah, amazing. And what books have you written, Dave?
Well, I'm not a published writer at all. I've written papers. I do a lot
Okay.
of presentations. I do many to municipalities. I just did a big presentation to a policy studies class at Queen's University. Um, I, because of Orange Shirt Day and the residential school issue in the last while, I was making presentations to Trent University, for instance, some of the classes in Trent, and our local municipality here in Northumberland County, the 5 townships within the county. I made a presentation to them on the Orange Shirt Day on the residential school issue, um, and I'm writing a manuscript on Fred Simpson. It's been percolating for a number of years actually, but there's other reasons why it's been hard to just sit down and do that. I'm not a professional writer, of course.
Right.
I've worked at the First Nation level for over 30 years, so it's something that I hope to accomplish sooner than later. I'm getting up there. I'm 60. I'm not that old, but I better get her done here because it's community history is something that people really, really love to read about. They really love to understand, in our community, understand the totem system, the clan system, the treaty history, and people are really moved by that because it's their ancestors that were involved in this, and it
Yeah.
gives them it really helps in their sense of identity, and it helps them to really anchor themselves in the community. And so whatever way I can help people understand, even in the acquisition of photographs, that's really important. People really love to know who was in this photograph or what was this all about. And so in Alderville First Nation, I was involved in the research of the first history book that occurred here in 1990. And I know since that time, people have really been moved by understanding the history of the community. And I would say it's been since 1989 that this repatriation of our community history has been occurring.
Yeah. Wow. And speaking of photographs, just to change directions a little bit, I noticed you've got the Beatles Abbey Road behind you. And that room looks like it might be kind of a secret den where there's a lot of music, like a beat lab maybe, or...
Yeah, you got
Thank you so much, Dave. That's part one of Dave's interview. Part two will be next week on June 23rd. And in part two, Dave talks a little bit more about his music, the Dave Mowat Curbside Shuffle Band, which started out in Winnipeg, is still going. Also going to talk about the blending of history and Dave's music and how that influences his politics, wild rice harvesting, and then this new chapter in Canada's history with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and residential schools. So looking forward to everyone joining us next week for part two of Dave's interview. Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining the Thriving Mayor Show. Make sure to like and share and tell your friends and colleagues. Mayors are awesome and are the change agents to enhance the quality of living for over 80% of us. Remember what Coach Wooden said, you cannot live a perfect day without doing something for someone who can never repay you. Much love and peace. Until next time.